Why is it that most people avoid therapy? I don't think that people avoid therapy because they don't need it, because at least I know a lot of people who can use therapy. I think people avoid it because of something a lot deeper, like stigma. So why don't we talk about it? My name is Neat. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I talk to a lot of people who have a lot of problems about their problems.
So people hear the word stigma all the time. What does stigma mean to social workers?
Stigma can mean a lot of things. Um, in actuality, it's really like the cultural, maybe culturally, like the way people frame an idea, right? So when we talk about stigma in the mental health world, it's really referencing the negative things. It's typically connected to some kind of negative connotation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it's much deeper than a lot of people think.
Absolutely. It's a lot deeper.
And a lot of stigma isn't even external. It's the voice in our head, in our own head, telling us that we should be able to handle things. Do you see that a lot?
Yes. A lot of times because of messages in the media and maybe even culturally, right? The messages that you grew up hearing. For example, let's say stigma surrounding men, right? Like people say men should be strong. So it can be a stigma for a man to go to therapy because it could mean that he's not strong, as strong quotations, right? Because that's the belief that society holds, is that men should not cry, men should not share their emotions.
How does that show up with the clients that you work with?
It shows up in a lot of ways, especially it can get really touchy when we're talking about diagnoses. Diagnoses have the biggest stigmas attached to them. We grew up where people were, I want to say, careless or mindless with the way in which they use words. And we forget that words have meanings. And it's not just these trendy slang or whatever that's like put on social media. For example, a lot of people will say, oh, I'm so OCD, right? Forgetting that OCD is an actual diagnosis, and there's people who struggle with these obsessive compulsive disorders, and it impacts the way in which they live their lives. But we become so conditioned that we can just throw a word on anything that we're feeling, especially when it comes to like mental health diagnoses. I'm This person is so psychotic. Like I've worked with people in active psychosis. It's it's not what you're calling your friend because they're going off on you. It's something much deeper.
So you mentioned that you work with people in psychosis. How do you feel like stigmas differ based off of those diagnoses?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, again, they've grown up hearing the word, oh, this person's a psycho, this person is psychotic. And they maybe have never actually lived with somebody who's going through a psychotic episode, or somebody who's actually schizophrenic, or who is maybe like bipolar with schizoaffective disorder. So they don't really know the extent of that diagnosis. And just like any diagnosis out there, it shows up differently in different people. You're gonna need to re-ask that because I feel like that was a layered question.
It was, it was. So when you're working with people that are psychotic or people that just have depression, how does stigma impact the way that they see the world?
Mhm. I would say now, not everywhere, but for the most part, I think we're seeing where depression is becoming a little more normalized. So people aren't afraid to talk about, they're diagnosed with depression, or they're going through a depressive episode, or they're having these symptoms show up. I think that even in um, our culture, in like television and films, you see depression being represented. I don't necessarily see that we have that. We haven't really broken the stigma when it comes to these, I would say, more acute diagnoses like schizophrenia, where people just kind of think of the schizophrenic person. I can't even like think of a character in a movie right now that I can say like this person was represented as schizophrenic. So there's a huge stigma on it. I've worked with people who they absolutely cannot accept that diagnosis because to them, they're not the person on the street corner who is yelling at people. That's not them. So how can they be schizophrenic?
So a lot of people are misrepresented when it comes to stigma in the media.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you personally work with clients and how do you decrease the stigma?
I think normalizing and validating, that's two things that us therapists, clinicians will do with everybody, regardless of the severity of your mental illness, right? But validating and normalizing is one of the ways to destigmatize and just recognizing and showing empathy for people because I myself, I don't have these diagnoses. I'm not diagnosed with schizophrenia. So I can never say that I truly understand the weight of that diagnosis and how it impacts somebody. But I could recognize that there is a stigma. So it's going to make it more difficult for somebody, especially if they're, say, in a community that does not absolutely accept or understand or recognize mental illness. That can make it so much more difficult for them. I could recognize that it's going to be a heavy weight on somebody. I've had to talk to people about what is that going to look like when they go back to their jobs? Do they have to disclose this diagnosis to their job? And are they going to have a job if they do that? So just being able to validate somebody's feelings and also just normalize that what you're going through, it's normal. Like there's nothing wrong with you and you can work through this.
So it sounds like just being there for the person, making sure that they feel heard and seen really helps to destigmatize the stigma of mental health.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions. So there are a lot of people in various cultural groups that believe that family matters need to stay in the home. Don't go and tell anybody about what's going on in the home. And I believe that that attitude can be very harmful to people because if somebody needs help and they don't feel comfortable, going to their parents or going to their aunt or uncle, it's not healthy for them to just suppress those feelings. They need to find somebody to talk to them. They need to have an outlet. They need, again, their experience, their symptoms to be normalized, to be validated so that they can get the proper help. A lot of times, families can create this sense of perfectionism where like they put so much pressure on their kids to perform. And then you have these high functioning, very anxious adults who have always learned how to mask these symptoms. They've always learned how to fly under the radar. I'm talking about, the firstborn daughter in an ethnic household, like, you know what I'm talking about. And they're able to fly under the radar, but deep inside they might be really, really struggling. And then there's a stigma that's keeping them from getting the help that they need.
And that help being therapy.
Absolutely. I think therapy is one piece of the puzzle. For some people, it's going to be therapy with med management. For some people, it's just going to be talk therapy. For some people, there's just, yeah, I think, let's say therapy to simplify it because there could be so many different avenues, but definitely therapy is a good start.
So people often say, "I'll go to therapy when things get really bad." What does that say about how we view mental health?
I think it's definitely signaling that you have to wait until you are crashing and burning and you're having a mental breakdown and you are at your wit's end. And that's not true. I think once you recognize that you are carrying a burden that feels way too heavy for you, or you find yourself just in a place where you don't want to be anymore, or you're just like, gosh, I feel like I'm just carrying so much and I have nowhere to put it. I have no one to give it to. I think that's a great time to reach out to somebody and start therapy.
And in my mind, that pulls up the whole part when it comes to mental health stigma that it's treated more as something that is done in the moment too when we're in a crisis. When in reality, it should be more preventative, like going to the doctor.
Absolutely. I think it's great that you say that because I was just talking to a client about this, about how if the symptoms that they were having, if they manifested themselves physically, they would be more proactive about going to the doctor about it. They wouldn't feel any ounce of shame about telling their doctor that they were having these physical symptoms. But because mental illness manifests unseen, it's seemingly invisible. The symptoms are not physical, but they are mental. People do not give it that same urgency. They don't give it that same care. You don't think like, oh, I need to check in with somebody because, I'm overloaded. I'm really stressed. No. But when you're like, man, I'm so fatigued. I've been having a headache for weeks. You're going to make an appointment to see your doctor. At least I hope you are.
I love that you brought up shame and the fear of judgment that really comes along with stigma and mental health treatment. Do you think that people are more afraid of the symptoms or how others might perceive them if they admit that they're struggling?
I want to say, I think it's more about the stigma, the shame, the fear aspect of it because there's so much stigma attached to mental health where there's like this idea that if I'm going to therapy, that must mean that there's something wrong with me. That must mean that I am broken or something. So I think it's more so like, what are people gonna think when they find out that I go to therapy? What are they gonna think when they find out that I have a therapist? They're gonna think that there's something wrong with me, right? But I guess we don't even normalize the fact that there's nothing wrong with something being wrong with you anyways. Like you just need some extra help sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No matter what we're going through, everybody needs help. And especially when you were talking about the firstborn in an ethnic household too, that person isn't necessarily going to want to look weak, going to want to be vulnerable in people, around people.
That's true. Yeah.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about word choice because I feel like the words that we use impact mental health and mental health stigma. So when we hear words like crazy or triggered used casually, what do you feel like that impacts stigma?
Yeah, I think I don't want to say that it devalues them, but I think to a certain extent it makes them seem so casual and simple. And also for the people that are going through that, like nobody wants to be associated as crazy. I think that's nobody wants to be looked at as if they're crazy. When someone's like, "Oh, you're looking crazy," like who would want that? Who would want that put on them? You know. So I think that saying things like that really just, I think it depersonalizes people who are going through again like those mental illnesses, calling people psychotic, calling, oh, they're just OCD, or oh, they're just.
And we see that too online too, and a lot on social media, how we see videos of people and they're given these labels of, oh, this person is crazy, this person is psychotic.
Hmm. Yeah, we really do.
What if needing help wasn't a sign something was wrong, like you were saying before, but it's a sign that something was working?
What if it was a sign that something was working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, tell me a little bit more.
So that someone is choosing growth rather than actually avoiding a problem.
I think that that should be seen as a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. I think the hardest thing that somebody can do is to ask for help. Oftentimes, like we take on this mindset, especially within like hustle culture. We take on this mindset that like I have to do it all. I have to be grinding. I have to do it by myself. I have to get out the mud. A lot of people say things like that and they view things like that. So I believe that it is actually a sign of strength to ask somebody for help, to admit that you are struggling.
So, to wrap things up, if someone listening is thinking, this sounds like me, but I'm still scared, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that you are not alone. You are not broken. There is help out there for you. And if you don't know where to start, you can always reach out to me. My name is Nee. Again, I'm a licensed master social worker, and I help people when they feel too overwhelmed to carry their load. I got you.